We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Gimel Amid Beis and Meseches Bava Kamma. This is Bava Kamma Daf 53b. The Gemara said we have the following Machlokas Amoroim, Shor v'Shor Psule HaMukdashin Shenalchu. Let's say you have a regular shor and also a shor that's a shor of disqualified hektish, and together they gore. Abaya Amar, Abaya says Mishalim Chatzi Nezek. Abaya says the person pays Chatzi Nezek. Ravina Amar Mishalim Revia Nezek. And the Ravina says that the person pays a quarter Nezek. And we'll see Tosas in terms of Shor Psule HaMukdashim. Clearly the idea is that Shor Psule HaMukdashim is not chayiv. Tosas explains Shor v'Shor Psule HaMukdashim Shenagchu Perish Rav Yehuda Gon. Rav Yehuda Gon explains as follows: Dahainu Shor Bechor Delo Parakle. When we're talking about a Shor Psule HaMukdashim, what we actually mean is a shor that's a Bechor that was not redeemed. Ulefisha Ein Lo Pidyon, and because you can't redeem it, Afal Pisha Dino Lios Nishchat B'Medina, even though the halacha really is that it could be shechted, V'nechal LeKohanim B'mumo, it could be eaten by Kohanim regular because it has a blemish, Katzvi V'cha'ayo, like any other animal. You can even give it to non-Jews. This is essentially a bechor that has lost that kedusha because it has a mum. Mitam de iskish letzvi va'ayol. Again, it's compared to tzvi va'ayol. The point is, nevertheless, when it comes to this shor that's a bechor that gets this mum, it is not considered mum and hadyot v'shor reyehu. It's not considered to be shor reyehu, and therefore it's not part of the halachas of hezek. The same would be with any disqualified hektish that was not redeemed. But let's say you have a hektish, you have a carbon, an animal that's a carbon that was redeemed, it developed a blemish and it was redeemed. That we cannot be talking about over here. The shor reyehu mikru, that certainly would be called shor reyehu. Afal pisha asurim begizav avoda. Now, even though such a shor, you can't do anything with it, it's prohibited to shear it and to do work. To halakamon b'shmaitin mechayvin on shor hedyot shehem shor psule hamukdashin. Because later on we're going to say that if a regular shor kills a shor psule hamukdashin, it is chayiv. Ubor nami havim mechayvin, and even bor would be chayiv by shor psule hamukdashin. Ila misham dechsiv hamesi elo, if not for the pasuk of hamesi elo that we dealt with a little bit earlier. So in any case, the point is that this shor psule hamukdashin is not going to be responsible, is not going to be chayiv, and we have this machlokas that Abaya says chatzi nezek and Ravina says revia nezek a quarter. Rashi here explains shor hedyot v'shor psule hamukdashim shenagchu bein shneihem shor, meaning together they gore one shor. Abaya amar chatzi nezek mishalim. Abaya says that the amount of the payment is chatzi nezek, meaning Baal Hashor, meaning the owner of the regular shor, pays chatzi nezek, v'hashar mafsid hanizek, and the rest, the nizek loses out, because again, the shor psule hamukdashin, there's no payment from that shor. Uvetam mukminan. Now we're going to say that this is talking about a tam. Uchad Rabbi Nasan do amar, and it's like Rabbi Nasan who says, Madalesle l'shtalume mehai l'shtale mehai, that if you can't collect from one, you collect from the other one. V'have kamisha ein lo shutaf, so it's like there was no partner at all. Umishalim chatzi nezek kedino, so essentially it's going to pay chatzi nezek like the normal halacha. That's what Abaya says. And again, Ravina says that the amount is going to be a quarter nezek. As we will see, Ravina is following the Rabbanan and not Rabbi Nasan, as the Gemara now says. Ha v'ha betam, both are talking about a situation of a tam. Ha k'Rabbanan v'ha k'Rabbi Nasan, but one is following the Rabbanan and one is following Rabbi Nasan. As we just said, Abai is following Rabbi Nasan. Therefore, since you can't collect anything from the shor psuli hamukdashin, you collect the entire chatzi nezek from the owner of the regular shor. And the Rabbanan, meaning Ravina, follows k'Rabbanan. Rashi says Ravia nezek. That's going to be a quarter nezek. Hol v'yesh lo shut, because over here there is a partner, and the other one that you can't collect from the kodshim one, so you lose out on that quarter, and therefore you're only going to get a quarter from the owner of the regular shor. And the Gemara continues with another explanation of the machlokas Abai and Ravina. If you want, I could say as follows: Hava ha k'Rabbanan, really both of them, both Abai and Ravina, are following the Rabbanan, but ha betam, ha b'muad, one's talking about a tam, one's talking about a muad, meaning to say, according to Abaya says we're talking about a muad, and that's why you pay chatzi nezek. You're going to pay half, the other half will be lost. And again, according to Ravina, we're talking about a case of a tam, so you're going to pay half of the chatzi nezek, you're going to pay a quarter nezek, and the other part will be lost, following the Rabbanan. And the Gemara continues, Ika Diamri, there are those that have another version of the Machlokas Abai and Ravina as follows. Abai Amar Chatzi Nezek, that Abai says Chatzi Nezek, that's the same as above, but Ravina Amar Kule Nezek, where Ravina says the Baal Hashor pays the entire damage, and according to this version of the Machlokas, Hava Ha B'muad, you can say that we're always talking about a muad, Ha k'Rabbanan v'ha Rabbi Nasan, and one is following the Rabbanan, and one is following Rabbi Nasan. According to this version, Abai would be following the Rabbanan, so you just pay the Chatzi Nezek, the other half is lost, and Ravina says, no, we follow Rabbi Nasan, and therefore if you can't collect from one, you collect from the other, you collect the entire thing. If you want, I could say within this version, ha v'ha Rabbi Nassan, both follow Rabbi Nassan, and ha b'muad v'ha b'tam, but one's talking about a muad, Ravina is talking about a muad, so he's going to pay again the entire thing like Rabbi Nassan says, and Abai is talking about a tam, so it's only going to be chatzi nezek. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Shor v'yadam shedachfu labor, if a shor and a person, they push another person into a pit, so they're all partners in the damage, there are three partners in this damage, the shor, the person, and the bor, le'inyan nizakin, so in terms of any damage that occurs, kulan chayav, and they are all going to be chayiv. And Rashi explains, Shor v'adam shedachfu davar echad labor, a shor and a person, they push something, as we'll see it's going to be a person, they push this person into a bor, v'nimtzu shloshton shutfin b'nezik, it turns out that all three of them are partners in the damage. Hashor v'habor v'ha'adam. The shor and the bor and the adam are all partners. So Rava says, L'inyan nizakin, in terms of damages, kagonim dachvu shamadam, for example, let's say they push a person into this pit, v'huzak, and the person is injured, the person does not die, but is injured, Mishalman ben kulam pachas damav, they all pay the lessening of this person's value, which is what we call nezek, to kulan chayavin ben nizkei adam, because all three are chayav and nizkei adam. The had the kaim ulam lagabe bor shor v'lo adam, when we say by a bor, that a bor is not responsible for an adam, it's only shor. If a shor falls into the bor, the Baal HaBor has to pay, but not if an adam falls into the bor, not if a person falls in. That's biktala kaimalan, that's only if the person dies. Kigonim nafal asocho eved v'meis, like an eved falls in and dies. Aval ben nizak and chayiv, but for damages, for injuries, actually the bor is chayiv on that. Uch Rabbi Nassan he, and the point over here according to Rav is we're following Rabbi Nassan, to lo azal basar dechifa l'chuda. We don't only follow the shor, let's say, that pushed into the bor, but the Baal HaBor is responsible as well. So the point is, as far as Nezikin is concerned, all three of them are going to be responsible, and therefore they are all chayiv. But Rava continues, L'inyan arba devarim, let's say you have the other four things, meaning besides for nezek, you have tsar, ripoy, sheves, and boshes, or udmei valdes, let's say that the person that was pushed in was a pregnant woman, and there's a miscarriage, so for those, adam chayiv, shor ubor pater, for both of those, the halach is a person is chayiv, shor and bor are pater, and arba devarim, and they're also pater and dmei valdes, so only the person will be chayiv in that case. And Rashi says, arba devarim shein levad mi nezek, again, those are the four payments aside from nezek, adam shedach vo chayiv, so the person who does the pushing is chayiv. Aval hashor v'habor peturim, but the shor and the bor are pater. The kaimalon ish ba'amiso v'lo shor ba'amiso. When it comes to the arba dvarim, it says ish, it has to be a person who does it, not a shor. V'chein b'dmei valdus, also for the, when you pay for the fetus, when you pay for the offspring, anoshim ksiv v'lo shvarim, it talks about people, not shvarim, not oxen, and so therefore that only applies to the adam, doesn't apply to the shor and the bor. And Rava continues, linyan kofer, ushloshim shalevet, let's say it's a situation of kofer, let's say the person died, kofer is a payment that's only done when a shor kills a person. Also shloshim shal eved, let's say a shor kills an eved, there's a fine of 30 shkalim that only applies to the shor, and that's why the Gemara says shor chayiv adam ubor peturim, the shor is going to be chayiv, but the adam and the bor will be pater. And Rashi says linyan kofer and mace, again if the person dies, shor chayiv kedino uvemuad, that's the normal halacha by shor by a muad, adam ubor peturim, but adam and bor are pater. Adam, now the person, the reason why the person is pater, the habar ketalu, he's actually chayiv misa, so there's no payment for a person. V'inami lo asr bein, even if he wasn't warned and he's not going to get the death penalty, still pater, he's pater. Midatana de vechizkiya ba'aminei chesakad, we learned that earlier. Ubor dechsiv shor v'lo adam, and when it comes to bor, again as we said earlier, it's shor v'lo adam. A bor is only responsible for a shor dying in the pit, but not responsible for a person dying in the pit. And so therefore, again, that's why in this particular case, it's going to be the shor that's chayiv and the adam and the bor that's pater. Le'inyan kalim, now let's say kalim fall into are pushed into the pit. V'shor psule hamukdashin, or let's say a shor of disqualified hektish is pushed into the pit. So adam v'shor chayavin, the adam and the shor will be chayiv. Ubor pater, happens to be that bor is pater by kalim, and bor is also pater by shor psule hamukdashin. We mentioned this earlier because it says v'hamesi elo. It has to be that the mace, that dead animal, has to be something that you have full control over. That's not true by shor psule hamukdashin. There are some restrictions. That's what the Gemara now says. My time, what's the reason? Amar krava hamesi elo. It says by bor, it says v'hamesi elo, but misha hameshalo. It only applies if the mace, if the dead animal can really be his. Yatzazeh she'ein hamei shalo. It excludes shor psule hamukdashin where it's not shalo. As Rashi explains, my time of bor potter, why is bor potter when it comes, we know by kalim it's potter, why is it potter when it comes by shor psulei hamukdashim, t'chsiv v'hamesi alo gave bor, by bor it says v'hamesi alo, misha hamesh shalo, it means that the dead animal has to be shalo, he has to be able to do what he wants with it, sheyachol limchor hanavela, he can sell the nevela, he can sell the carcass, yotzazu sha'afal pisha nifta ton kfura, here even though it was a psulei hamukdashim, it was a shor that was a carbon that developed a mum and it was redeemed, but still it needs to be buried. The amrinan gave psulei hamukdashim sheniftu, because we say by psulei hamukdashim sheniftu, but Meseches bechoros perak sheni tizbach velo giza, basar velo cholov, yachalta velo leklavecha, slaughtered but not for the shearings, meat but not for the milk, you eat it but not to your dogs, mikan shein podinas hakachim lachilon leklavim, that shows that you're not allowed to redeem the kachim to feed it to dogs. Again, since there are these restrictions, that's not considered v'hamesi elo, and that's why it's not chayiv when it comes to bor. But the Gemara continues, L'meimer, does that mean to say, the pshita leila Rava, that this is obvious to Rava? It's not true. The halacha of shor psulei hamukdashim by bor is not obvious to Rava. V'ami boy leila Rava, it was really a question to Rava. The boy Rava, because Rava asked, shor psulei hamukdashim shenafa lebor, if you have a shor of disqualified hectares that falls into a pit, mahu, what's the halacha? Hai v'hamesi alo b'misha hameis shalo, yotzazeh she'ein hameis shalo. Does v'hamesi alo mean it has to be that dead body of the animal is his, and it would exclude shor psulei hamukdashim where it's really not fully his? Maybe v'hamesi alo is something else. It means to say that the bailam actually are metafel benevela. What that means to say, that was a halacha we learned earlier in a situation where the animal falls into the pit. So we say that the owner of the animal has to deal with the nevela, and the owner of the pit only has to pay, doesn't have to worry about the pchas nevela, about the fact that the nevela is going to lose value. Maybe that's what v'hamesi alo is for. And the Gemara says, Basar debaya hadar pashta. It's true that Rava had the question, but after he asked the question, he actually answered the question, and he understood that it's not for bailam metaflim benevela, rather it's for the halacha of b'misha hameis shalo, that shor psulei hamukdashim is potter by bor. And so the Gemara says, El bailam metaflim benevela minole. Well, if that's the case, where does Rava learn the halacha of bailam metaflim benevela? How do we know that the owner of that shor is the one that has to deal with that dead body of the animal? And the Gemara says to that, nafkale min v'hamesi elo de shor. That we learn now from, there's another v'hamesi elo. It's v'hamesi elo of a shor. When one shor gores another shor, it says v'hamesi elo. That's where we learn out bailam metaflim benevela. And the Gemara says, my chazis de v'hamesi elo de shor mifkas leila bailam metaflim benevela, v'hamesi elo de bor mifkas leila misha hameis shalo. How do you know that the v'hamesi elo of shor, that teaches us bailam metaflim benevela, and the v'hamesi elo of bor teaches us misha hameis shalo and not shor psulei hamukdashim? Epochana, maybe I should reverse it. Maybe by bor it should be bailam metaflim benevela, and maybe by shor it should be lemisha hameis shalo. And the Gemara says to that, mistabra petur gabe bor. It makes sense to say that the exemption, in this case the exemption is the one by shor psulei hamukdashim, that applies to bor. Ho'alu potter bo as kalim. Since we find another exemption by bor, we find that there's an exemption by kalim by bor, so there's probably this other exemption of shor psulei hamukdashim. But the Gemara says, Adrab, in the contrary, petur gabe shor, maybe we should apply the exemption by shor. Shekain potter bo chatzi nezek, because we do find an exemption of chatzi nezek when it comes to shor. And the Gemara says, kulei nezek mios lo eshkechan, but by shor we don't find an exemption of the entire nezek that we do find by bor by kalim, so we apply the petur also of shor psulei hamukdashim by bor as well. And Rashi says, L'bayla metaflin benevela, again the idea that the owner of the shore that was damaged has to deal with the nevela of the dead animal. Kinamrino in Bava Kamma, that we say in Bava Kamma in the first parak, v'hamesi elo lenizik. We say that the mesi elo means to the person who was damaged, he has to deal with that dead animal. Atomer lenizik v'chulu, then the Gemara goes on and analyzes it. Is it really to the nizik? Maybe it's to the mazik. And the Gemara goes on to say again this idea of bayla metaflin benevela. And the Gemara then said, "Umay chazes tahai v'hamesi elo deshor mifkas le'bayla metaflin benevela u'mechayeves le'anagichas psulei hamukdashim." Why do we say by shor that there is a chiyuv by shor psulei hamukdashim? Epechana, maybe it should be reversed. V'kimna chiyuv the psulei hamukdashim abor. Maybe it's bor that should be chayiv am psulei hamukdashim. And again, then the Gemara said since there's already an exemption by bor, we apply the exemption of shor psulei hamukdashim to bor as well. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, "Nafal asocha shor v'kelev and ishtabru v'chulu." Let's say a shor and its kalim fall into a pit. So then the owner of the pit is only responsible for the shor, is not responsible for the kalim, because again there's an exemption of kalim by bor. And the Gemara says, "Masnisin delok Rabbi Yehuda." Our Mishnah does not follow the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya, because we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yehuda mechayev al niskei kalim b'bor. Rabbi Yehuda says that when it comes to damages that happen to kalim by a pit, the person is actually chayev. The balabor is chayev. The Gemara says, "My time of the Rabbanan." What's the reason of the Rabbanan that that say there is an exemption. The Yomar Kruk, because the pasuk says v'nafal shama shor o chamor. The pasuk says that into the pit falls a shor or a chamor. So we learn shor v'lo adam, chamor v'lo kelim. A shor falls in there, not a person. There's an exemption by a person. A chamor falls in there, not kelim. There's an exemption when it comes to vessels. For Rabbi Yehuda, but Rabbi Yehuda says, "O l'rabos hasakelim." The word "o" in the pasuk actually comes to include kelim and includes vessels. For Rabbanan, and the Rabbanan respond to that. And Rashi says, "Shor v'lo adam deloksiv v'nafal shama hanofel." It could just say that whoever falls there falls. Alma lemudei also by saying shor or chamor, that's an exclusion. Well, the kamei parach shar behemus manali. The Gemara later will ask, how do we know other animals? It only says shor and chamor. Dil makula mimatin, maybe mimatin, and maybe you exclude all of them. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Dalid Amud Aleph.